Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube. Back with another read on to Benight and Beguile, Book 4, Chapter 9, The Devil's Sea Shanty. The storm swirling above Welshport grew and grew. The wind howled in the trees. The ocean seemed angry. It bashed up against the rocky shoreline with a force that felt it would dislodge the ancient stones that held the island together. The ships at sea rocked over giant mountains of waves, up high above valleys of water, then down deep into the flowing and cascading waves that pushed the ships up again over and over, like in a repetitive motion. This was no ordinary storm. This was Caspian's doing. This This was the fruition of his promise to Rebecca to remove Matthew Nevy's life one way or another. He sought to do this too, as Matthew was a clear sign of the good in the world. Caspian saw it, Caspian felt it, and Caspian feared it. The demon knew if Matthew lived, the good in him, the love from his heart, the innocence and light he held in his body would thwart Caspian's control, not only over Evie and those that she cared for, but the rest of the Lord family, and perhaps the world that Caspian so wanted to rule. A storm with winds of so strong that could rip the paint off buildings, the barks off of trees, and the skin from human bone was brewing. A hurricane of devilish and monstrous proportions was the only way to sink Matthew's influence. Literally, in his room lit by candles that glowed of yellow and orange light, even Caspian sat on a Persian rug with images of lions and tigers devouring their prey. The drapes were not drawn despite the growing storm outside. His window was open, allowing the powerful winds to bluster and lifted the heavy drapes into the air. Caspian's eyes were closed, his mind locked on the dwelling violent sea outside. His fury, evil and malevolent, called for it of his powers to swirl out of his body and into the atmosphere that brewed the storm. It rained like never before, gushing water onto every surface on the island. Villagers scrambled to hide. They covered themselves in their windowless rooms, hoping for the storm to pass quickly. Window shutters locked tight, doors too. Caspian's powers were overwhelming, and the fishing trawler Matthew was on the in the bullseye. On the trawler, Matthew and the rest of the crew frantically tried to pull in the sails. They scattered around the dock of their ship, ripping at cords and ropes. The sails whipped in the wind, unbound. "Rip 'em off! Rip 'em off!" one sailor yelled to another, instructing him to release the sails towards the bow of the ship. "They ain't moving!" another sailor screamed back, as the latch holding the ropes was stuck. Matthew, hearing this too, quickly ran over to help. Then another man came. Three men pulled and pulled on the latch, holding down the ropes that held the bow sails up. Then suddenly the metal latch released, lifted into the air, and smashing one man in the face. He groaned a sound so inhuman as his teeth burst from his mouth. The pain was intense. He couldn't see with all the blood in his face, with the ship bashing in the wild storm. A sailor was unsteady on his feet, covering his face in pain and unable to hold his step. He fell overboard and into the wild ocean that took him under. Matthew and the other sailors looked into the dark water in horror as the rain poured down over them. "He's gone, mate, gone!" one sailor shouted. Matthew's eyes, wide with fear, looked back towards the mainland and towards Welshport Island. His heart sank worried for Evie and the baby she was carrying while the storm, Caspian storm, raged in their direction. Flames, dark flames, burned all around Mary Good. Her legs seemed to be trapped, tied to something. She could not move. She screamed for Philip, but the sound of the fire overpowered her voice, and he did not come for her. She tried to reach her trapped legs, and her arms were tied behind her back to a large wooden stake. Her lungs filled with smoke, black, black as tar. Then in the heat and smoke of all the fire burning around her, Mary saw a face. The face laughed at her as she suffered in the prairie. As the smoke and sulfur continued to choke Mary, she was able to make out who the face belonged to. Caspian. She screamed at him. She cursed at him and begged for him to untie her, but he laughed a laugh so deep and menacing that it shook Mary to her core. As the face of Caspian taunted her in the fire, it began to grow larger and larger, and his mouth came closer and closer to Mary. In a split second, Caspian looked at her and said, "Cook, witch," and opened his devilish mouth and swallowed Mary whole. Caspian, stop this, stop all of this, Mary shouted over the sound of enraged flames below. Caspian only laughed at her. Mary screamed again Mary screamed again. The fire continued to fill her lungs and the air around her with the thick black smoke that swelled in the sky and clouded over Mary's burning body. How did she get here? How did Caspian tie her up? And she had no memory of it. With the confusion suddenly lifting from Mary's mind, she realized it had to be a nightmare controlled by a demon who infected the island of Welshport. With this realization, Mary screamed in horror as Caspian's growing face began to come down over her body, and his mouth devoured her, and suddenly the sound of her own scream awoke Mary in bed at the inn in the village, safe and sound, and not surrounded by Caspian's flames of hell, burning like a witch from Salem. But oddly, the stench of sulphur remained. "Are you all right?" Philip asked, his big arms pulling her close to him. She could feel the warmth of his bare chest. She felt safe. She reached down to where her baby bump was growing, the child she and Philip created when they first made love, locked in the turret room at Terramore. She breathed a sigh of relief. It was still there. There was fire. I was burning the heat. I could still feel it, Philip. I was dying. I was dying, Mary explained of her dream. "You're okay now." Oh, what the heck? "Yeah, you're okay now. You're safe. The baby is safe. If it's just a dream," Philip answered back. "No, it was more than that. It was him. Caspian knows we're here. He can sense us. He's incredibly powerful, concerned for our growing child." "Mary, listen to me," Philip replied, looking at her dead in the eyes. "We won't let him hurt our baby, or Evie's baby, or anyone. Whatever happens from here on, it will be the beginning of the end of Caspian Cassador." Mary stared deep into Philip's eyes. "Do you really think so?" "I do. I have to. We have to. We don't have a choice," Philip said, speaking over fallen rain outside. Then another strange sensation came to Mary as she sat up in bed. It was almost like the reverse of what she felt in her dreams. It wasn't fear, it was calm. She looked towards the window and slowly got out of bed. She tiptoed to the window that was open slightly, allowing the sound of pouring rain to fall and drops to splatter over the window sill. She pulled back the lace curtain, and from her view of their room at the end, she saw a large ship pulling into the shadowy docks down at the village marina. Sebastian, she whispered. Philip got out of bed and covered himself in a blanket from the bed as she walked over to her. Sebastian, he asked, confused. He's come back. That's him. I can sense him. He's back, Mary replied in excitement as she quickly reached for her clothes that were carefully flung over a chair in the room. Hurry, we have to meet him down there. He could have her. He could have the last sister, Mary said quickly, putting on her dress. Philip nodded and followed suit. The terrible storm raged on in the night. Somehow the ship from Boston found the swinging light of the Welshport Islands lighthouse and docked safely. Sebastian, Jacqueline, and the rest of the passengers from the ship named Ignis scurried down the long ramp on the dock side. Jacqueline looked up into the sky. As rain fell on her face, she touched the water. It was warm. She then turned to the sea and saw it thrashing up against the docks and the shoreline, and couldn't imagine how they even made it to the Maine from Massachusetts alive. This is his doing, Jacqueline said as Sebastian interlocked his arm with hers. Sebastian, seeing the storm too, as something he had never seen before in all his life on the island, nodded his head in agreement. Otherworldly, he replied, of the strangeness of the strength of the storm. We don't have a lot of time. We have to take cover. He'll know we're here. As the smattering of gatherers parted and scooped up the small number of passengers that came to Welshport Island, two familiar faces stood out in the darkness, like two bright candles under the shadow of their umbrellas. Philip and Mary. Mary rushed over to Sebastian, her vampire cousin, and in the pouring rain grabbed hold of him and hugged him tight. She had feared he gave up on the world, not and would not return, or worse, she thought perhaps something awful had happened and he was dead. I'm so happy to see you, so happy. Thank goodness you've returned, she said to him as Philip caught up. As you can see, Philip replied, things have gotten very strange. It's him, Sebastian said of Caspian. Mary nodded, and this must be her, Mary added, noticing the woman to Sebastian. We've been waiting for you. Mary and Jacqueline's eyes locked. They began to tear up as they realized just how connected they were, almost like sisters, real blood sisters, and not just fragments of diminishing coven of witches. Jacqueline grabbed both of Mary in extended arms and interlocked her hands with Mary's. There was an instant lashing of powers. Together they felt it like a surge of energy. Rushing from one body to the other, the powerful energy made Mary's baby bounce in her belly. Oh my, Jacqueline said, feeling the baby in her own body as the two witches slowly melded into each other as one telepathically. We have a lot of we have a we have a lot to catch up on. We meet with Gregory. We let it slip that people at Terramore are into Caspian too. We're not alone in this, Philip said. Jacob too, Sebastian asked of his uncle. Especially Jacob. There have been incidences at the house causing Jacob's concern, especially around your grandmother. She's not been herself, they say. They know Caspian's game. They've even called Donovan Ryan to help, Philip added. The priest, Jacqueline said, surprising the three. Philip confirmed. How did you know that? Mary turned to Philip and smiled. She's my sister. She can feel it, can't you? Jacqueline smiled back almost shyly as the rain continued to pour over their umbrellas. We have to take cover. We have to get somewhere safe, as he's as powerful as I can sense. We're not safe here. He knows more than he lets on, and he's probably already sensing me here. Sebastian, too. Jacqueline replied as three yellow owls leaning off in a close by tree, watching the group. Agreed, Philip replied. If Father Ryan is helping, what does that mean? Can Jacqueline and Mary still join together and fight whatever Caspian is planning to do with my child? Sebastian wondered as they walked over to a smaller dock side, where a small boat was tied up and awaiting them. Father Ryan is going to need all the help he can get from us. I have a feeling they're planning to vanquish Caspian as soon as they can. They know the darkness he's brought to Terramore and the family. We have to get back to Good Island and be safe, Mary said. But look, Sebastian said, pointing to the wild ocean. Is it safe? Sebastian's right. It's not safe to travel on this boat to Good Island. We have to go back to the inn. That's our best bet, Philip replied. The group agreed and rushed off in the rain back towards the inn, where they'd hunker down for a very long and painful night. Mary held Jacqueline's hand the whole way. The rain fell slightly subsided, but continued to pour down as the hours went on through the night. In the strangely warm rain and mist, a small car pulled off the circle driveway at Terramore House and drove off quickly past the tall iron gate entrance to the estate, leaving Father Donovan Ryan on the front steps, cold, wet, and trembling. He turned from the car as it drove off into the distance and vanished and walked toward the front door. As he lifted his gloved hand to pull on the door knocker, the door opened, revealing Jacob Lord, who put his finger up to his lips, motioning for Donovan to stay silent. And then Jacob handed the priest a note. This monster knows all. He probably knows you're here. I have Constable Rain standing watch in the room across from him. We must go as quiet as possible and surprise him. Father Ryan nodded his head after reading the note. The two slowly walked past the foyer that was glowing with candles. The electricity had yet to reach this part of the mansion. Only the bedroom and two of the drawing rooms had been lined with electricity wire and the old house walls. As they ascended the large red carpet circular staircase together, a flash of light from the sky brightened the six rectangular windows and went through the staircase. Jacob, who was leading Father Ryan, turned and looked down at him again, put his finger to his lips to remind him to stay quiet. Thunder rolled, lightning came again, and then more thunder. Evie sat in her room, watching from a high window as the rain crashed down over the entire estate. Her stomach felt strange, uneasy. She took a breath and patted her baby belly that was bigger than ever. There, there, she told her little baby. A knock came at her door. Honey, are you all right? Aurora said, her stomach too uneasy in the night. Evie smiled sweetly. I've never seen a storm like this. Aurora walked in and closed the door behind her. Neither have I, not since I left England. I'm a little nervous. Matthew is out there. The sea is, I don't know, it's unruly, Evie replied. Maybe they'll turn back once they saw how dangerous it was. He could be on his way back right now, Aurora replied, holding her daughter's nervous hand. I hope so, Evie said as she turned again and looked out of the window into the distance where on a clear night she could see all the way to the ocean. But on this night she saw only darkness. Since Sebastian died in the fire, I have had this sinking feeling that something worse was coming. I haven't told anyone. I never would put that pressure on someone. After all, everything that's happened to me in the last 2 years is because of me. Because of you? What are you talking about? Sebastian's death in the fire wasn't your fault. Or ash as she cuddled up to her daughter. In a way, it was. Had I just let him be and never tried to be with him again while he was, she paused, the way he was, then maybe things would be different. Yes, they would have been. You would have never gotten to know and love Matthew the way you do now, Aurora reminded her. Evie smiled, but she felt guilty. I just feel like maybe I'm cursed. Maybe I did something in a different life that's causing so much pain in my life. What else would have my whole marriage to Sebastian have gone so wrong? It literally crashed and burned all around me. Now I'm staring out of this window and watching the storm. Amy paused before saying what she really was thinking and feeling. Darling, you didn't cause any of the terrible things that have happened, Aurora replied. Then she realized all of the terrible things she herself was responsible for and the grief it would cause Evie if she revealed it. Listen, you're going to have a baby soon. All these emotions are just because of the new life growing inside you. You're not responsible for the horrible things from the past. Somebody certainly is. Evie turned to Aurora from the window and smiled at her mother. And just before she thanked her for her kind words, she noticed Aurora's facial expression. What is it? Evie asked. What? Nothing, Aurora said, lying. Mother, I know you. When you bite your lip like that, I know you have something on your mind. Tell me, Evie said, as the lightning flashed. Both mother and daughter flinched in the bright light. Aurora could hold it back, she had to confess, but not everything. I did something that I regret, Aurora began. Evie's eyes squinted in suspicion. What have you done? Aurora had plenty of skeletons in her closet, and one fact that she would hold on to and not reveal to Evie, that being the death or the truth of the death of Robert, Evie's father, and Aurora's late husband. This confession felt much worse to Aurora. Aurora stood up in the chair and tangled and dangling ribbon from her sleeve nervously. Last night I did something that I am embarrassed about, and surely you'll hear about soon. Rebecca seems to be the type of woman who isn't capable of being discreet, but you should know or hear it from me before anyone else, Aurora said. Evie got up, her stomach churning as the storm along. What did you do? She asked her mother. In a strange mistake in identity, which is truly the only way I can honestly explain it, I was intimate with Caspian Cassador. Please, darling, don't make me go into details, Aurora confessed. Evie covered her mouth in a shock, but then giggled. Caspian, she said, not knowing his evil yet. It's not funny, darling. He's not a well man. He's got some hold over Rebecca, and sometimes I feel he's trying to do it to me, too. It was almost like I was dreaming, and then I woke up, and he was in bed with me. And Rebecca was there, and there was shouting, and Rebecca was angry, and it's all very blurry and confusing. He kept she kept saying that he wanted, or sorry, he kept saying that he wanted to make a child with me, or added TV's now serious reaction. A child? He replied, confused and a bit horrified. How can that even be? You see, Aurora replied, it's all very bizarre. In truth, and again, this is rather embarrassing for a mother to admit to her child, but I thought it was with Gregory. I thought it was him in bed with me. But why would Caspian say you were pregnant? Evie asked. Aurora again couldn't reveal all. She knew that Caspian has very much wanted a child, a baby, to empower himself more than anything on earth, and wanted Evie's baby, and had brainwashed Rebecca and Aurora to help take the child once born. That plan had been changed, thankfully, but the idea Aurora couldn't bring it upon herself to confess her complacency in the bizarre plot, no matter how brainwashed she was at the time. She knew how awful it would be for Evie to know this for her. It was sure one more secret Aurora had to keep from her children. I don't see how Rebecca still keeps him around. Even Jacob is suspicious of him. I just feel so awful about everything. I never meant to go to bed with that man, Aurora explained. Evie sighed. She could see her mother, Aurora, was feeling uncomfortable about the whole situation. The night was wearing long. Both women were in a state of whirlwind nerves and anxiety. Evie, being the good natured person she was, decided to leave it alone, let the winds blow and the rains fall, and not pursue anything else from the whole sordid event of the night before. As much as it is confusing and frankly very strange for me to hear what all this, Mother, it must have been awful for you to wake up in that state of confusion and such an intimate affair, especially with that deranged talk of you carrying his child, Evie replied. Deranged? That's a good word to use to describe Caspian, Aurora added. I can say, however, that if Jacob is suspicious of him, you won't have to worry too long. Jacob has a way of getting rid of people he's not fond of. Trust me, I know. He replied, alluding to the horrors Jacob subjected her to in the past. So you're not ashamed of me, Aurora worried, grabbing her daughter's hand. Evie smiled sweetly. She never saw them being as close as friends like this, and despite the cold, rainy weather outside, closeness warmed her heart. Mother, you're you're all adults. The discomfort and silliness of it will pass, Evie said, not knowing how deep Aurora and go that matter Rebecca had fallen prey to Caspian's predatory plot, just like this storm. It'll all pass. But there's a bright side, Evie added, perking her mother's attention. Bright side? What could that be? Evie worried, but confirmed that Matthew, who turned back to the window where the rain soaked the glass. She opened the window, where on a clear night she could see toward the sea, but tonight there was only blackness all around her. Matthew will return, Evie said hopefully. And when he does, we'll all leave Terramore and let Rebecca have Caspian for whatever she wants. And you and Nicky will move with us and we'll be done with the Lords. Or could see how happy this idea made Evie. She didn't want to stomp on her dream. She saw her beautiful pregnant daughter staring out of the sea, or where the sea would have been, and walked up to her from behind and held her tight. She said not a word, and let the rain and the thunder rumbled again in the sky, speaking for her. The storm, its strength was growing, and so was the danger for Matthew out at sea. Rebecca tossed and turned in her bed. She couldn't sleep. There was an uneasiness in her house, in her heart, in her mind. She sat up in bed, her eyes wide open. Sleep lingers in the green of her eyes. Out of bed now in her white nightgown, with her whitening red hair tied in a neat braid, she went over to her desk. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small box that, when she opened, revealed a glistening silver rosary. The thunder clapped again. She clenched in a flash, her heart skipping a beat. It seemed she reached for the rosary, and as soon as she touched it, it burned her fingertips. Rebecca watched as the rosary fell to the floor. She reached for it, and on the second touch, she felt the cool of the silver. God help us. She reached to herself, God help us all. As she spoke, a small crucifix she had on the sidewall between her two large windows began to flip upside down on its own, and Rebecca's eyes began to glow yellow. Caspian's work was just beginning. The rain was getting louder and louder as the two men, Jacob and Father Donovan Ryan, got closer to the bedroom Caspian was in. The hallway, dark and clouded with the puffering smoke of several candles, seemed like an ominous sign to Donovan that things were about to get very frightening for him and the others in the house. He tightened his grip around the handle of his bag. The leather of his glove squeaked as his grip squeezed. Then a door opened and Gregory peeked through. Jacob nodded to him as he entered with Father Ryan. Whispering, Jacob revealed the plan. Just outside in the room across the hall is Caspian. They may already be expecting us. I don't know. Gregory and I will enter. We'll do our best to subdue him and tie him down, and then you can begin. Gregory showed Father Ryan the ropes. What if the ropes don't work? Father Ryan asked. Jacob lifted a brow. You of all people should have more faith, Father. That's all we have now. That's all we have. Charlotte trembled in her room as she too saw the wild storm raging across the sky over Welshport. Her mind suddenly flashed flames, dark fire, smoldering heat like the sun hitting earth. She saw her mother Mary's face. Charlotte was seeing Mary's dream from earlier in the night. More flames. More fire, more flames. A thunderclap snapped Charlotte out of the sudden waking dream. It was terrifying to see for a 12-year-old girl, fearing what she saw in her mind, in the dreams her mother was having, and that Charlotte was tapping into. The young psychic girl quickly made her way out of the room and down another hallway and into her little brother's room was where Celeste was standing with the baby, attempting to soothe the child's wailing. Something is going to happen, Charlotte said. Celeste turned her back, lit by a storm flashing in baby Fabian's window. What do you mean? Celeste asked, reading the terror in the child's face. Charlotte did not respond. She did not have the words. Celeste only took Charlotte's facial expression for her word, just as yet another flash of thunder lit the windows. Caspian sat in the center of his bed. His legs were crossed, his eyes closed. He was preoccupied in his mind and had not sensed Father Ryan's arrival. He had other fish to fry. In truth, he had other issues at hand, especially that of Matthew Winterbourne. As Caspian's powerful mind continued to rip and tear through the sky in the form of a storm, and he had not sensed the priest enter, things were about to change. The tables turned. Matthew's ship was in peril. The sea washed over the bow of his ship. The water pulled at several sailors and took them overboard. The salty water controlled by Caspian and the storm heaved and pulled down the ship. The violently pushed it back up in the powerful waves. The rain tore through the sky and came down. Matthew and the remaining men did all they could to control the ship, but the storm was more powerful than they could have ever imagined. We're going down, sir, a sailor yelled to Matthew. Matthew grabbed his hand and pulled him into the bridge of the ship and closed the door behind him. Another sailor came running and tried to open the door, and he banged on the window, begging to be let in. Matthew ran over to the door as soon as his hand touched the doorknob. The boat tilted, and everyone fell on the side. The man outside flipped over the bridge and into the sea. Matthew and the sailor with him, and the bridge fell over with each other and hit the wall. Then the boat again flipped back, and the other side tossing and turning in the ocean like a toy boat in a child's bath. The ocean's waves, dark and hungry for more, bashed up against the glass for the bridge. I don't know how long the glass will hold, Once it bursts, there will be a rush of water. Do you understand me? You'll have to try and swim out, Matthew told his last crewman. I can't swim in that, a man yelled. You have to, Matthew said, grabbing at the man's shoulders and shaking. Then it happened. The waves of the powerful storm created a demon hit the glass. The two men in the bridge watched as the glass cracked. The crack grew and grew across the entire bridge, and the waves burst through, washing into the bridge like a giant untamed waterfall. The sailor grabbed on to Matthew, death in their eyes. The water filled faster and faster, and Matthew, too, a deep breath, and held it, and then dunked his head. The sailor lifted him back up as the water began to fill up to their chins. You have to hold your breath, Matthew screamed. I'm scared. I don't want to die, the sailor yelled back. Matthew slapped the man across the face, an attempt to shake the terror out of him for his mind to clear and focus on survival. Then, once again, ordered him to hold his breath. This time his fellow sailor did it, and then both dunked their head and swam through the burst window of the bridge. But the water was too swift. It pulled them both in. The undercurrent pulled them with such a force that went deep into the ocean. The dark waters swallowed the ship and the sailors and Matthew. In his head, Caspian smiled, sensing the boat go under. In a flash of thunder, Jacob, Gregor, and Father Ryan burst into the demon's bedroom in such a fast motion that Caspian had no time to react. Father Ryan pulled a wooden cross. The light of the Lord, I rebuke you, Father Ryan yelled. Caspian's eyes turned yellow, and he hissed at the sight of the crucifix. His handsome human face, carved with the wrinkle of time, twisted into a monster's face. Jacob and Gregor were strong, and they yanked at each arm of the beast and tied him to the bed. They got his legs and tied them to each other to the post. The demon inside Caspian's host's body hissed and spit. It tried to bite Gregory and Jacob, but his restraints were too tight. The crucifix held high up in the air, and Caspian's face seemed to subdue the monster slightly, giving the men time to think in his weakening state. Then a voice from the evil man trickled out in an evil growl. Clever, clever, clever priest, but it's too late. The sun has set on the house of Terramore. It's over. Silence, Stephen, Father Ryan screamed. With the light of the Holy Mother and the grace of our Lord God, I command you back to the depths of the darkness where you belong. Free the hold you have on this man's body. The temperature of the room dropped. Ice began to form. Caspian's eyes turned from its glowing yellow to black and empty, as they had disappeared completely out of their sockets. With a deep, twisted laugh that chilled them down to their bones, Caspian shouted, You're too late, you fool. You're all too late. His face transformed to the monster within the body of the man, just long enough for Father Ryan to see. Demon, be gone, the priest screamed as his breath formed puffs of the white smoke in the air. Caspian's laugh again, then spit at Ryan, who began to pray louder and louder, as so voice beamed over the soul of the thunder clapping. A body floated in the sea amidst the breeze of Matthew's fishing trawler, and then another body, then two more bodies. They floated there, lost in the cold waves, lost in the storm, lost at sea forever. Okay, guys, that's the read along. Really, really good, really intense. I'm curious to see because the Caspian is, they feel that Caspian is just possessed, like Caspian's this possessed person. I don't think that's the case in my opinion. I could be wrong. I think it's just I think the shadowy figure developed the body when um, Eliza Good left Good Island. That's just my view of it. I could be wrong. Don't hold me to that. I could be wrong. All right. Link to Benight and Beguile is going to be in the description box for book 4, chapter 9. Go check this out. Really, really good.